Hello and welcome to the Financial Wellness Hour. I am your host, Hirsch, Serman, and I'm thrilled to have you here today on WGSN-DB, the Going Solo Network. This show is for those wanting to learn more about creating financial wellness, and we will be exploring different life cycles. We're going to look at them both financially and emotionally, because personal finances are usually more about the emotions associated with your money than the finances themselves. Although we might be a little general in our discussions, we'd love to hear from you so we can make it more personal and relevant for you. Call in, or you can reach me through my website, lifecycle.financial. That's lifecycle.financial. Or you can post your comments and questions on Facebook or YouTube or wherever you're listening right now. Today, we're going to be talking about how do you get a better outcome. We're really going to talk about the outcomes. The way to get a better outcome when looking at a divorce is to ask, are you prepared? The more you prepare, the more clearly you're going to be able to think, and the more clear your decisions are going to be when you are negotiating and in the stress of the process. So this will help you in setting yourself up for a better outcome. Jennifer Lavin is my guest today. She is the principal divorce and family law attorney at Jennifer L. Lavin, PC. Over the last 15 months, I've got to know Jennifer, and I am a big fan. We've had some amazing stories we could share that we won't. She has a powerful story of her own and uses her skills and her experiences to help others. Jennifer, thank you for being here. I'm thrilled to have you here. You know, I've wanted you on the show for a little while already, so thank you.
Thank you so much, Hirsch, for having me, and it's a pleasure to be here and quite an honor, actually, so I'm appreciative of the invitation.
I appreciate that. Thank you. Before we kind of get into the topic, I'm going to ask if you can talk a little bit about your background and where your practice focuses as well.
Sure. So I am a divorce and family law attorney, and I came to law school as a byproduct really of my own divorce. So I've been where my clients are, although every case is different, certainly, and they're all unique and individual facts and circumstances. I will say that the background that I have as a divorce and family law attorney is certainly prompted and informed by my own experience. And I have my own firm here in the Chicago area. I practice in some of the major counties in the northern Chicago area. And I am a divorce and family law attorney with multiple perspectives in my practice. I do litigation-based matters that are mostly heavily influenced in the court system. And then I also am a mediator who helps people to resolve disputes in an alternative dispute resolution model. And I'm also a collaborative law attorney, which means that I'm even more of an alternative dispute resolution attorney in those cases, because there really is no court by design until the very, very end of the matter. And we're working completely outside the court system to do the divorce process. And I'm also a court-appointed child representative and guardian ad litem, where I work with children and on behalf of children in their family, their cases, whether it's a divorce matter or sometimes it's also for people who have not been married as well. And I'm also a parenting coordinator who also helps parents to be able to implement and interpret their parenting plans as well.
And what I love about that is I think sometimes people walk into an attorney's office and they know they want a divorce, let's say, but they really don't understand the options. They don't understand the responsibilities, and quite honestly, especially not always thinking about how do we manage this for the children. So I think the perspectives that you have and the experience you have is just so invaluable, which I love as well. So
thank you.
Often when someone is contemplating a divorce, they go back and forth, and it's a big decision. They're not sure if they should move forward. All of it makes sense. But once divorce is kind of on the table, if I can put it that way, I believe personally somebody should get as educated as possible. So with this in mind, when should someone actually, who is considering a divorce, initiate a consultation with a divorce attorney?
I think that there are a number of places along a spectrum where you can think about consulting with an attorney. All of them make sense. It really is an individual calculus that is based on your own facts and circumstances. But what I would suggest is that if you're contemplating divorce, it is, I think, a good idea to start then in terms of gathering information and trying to educate yourself about the process. I have people come to me at all stages of readiness in terms of whether or not they've already started thinking about the divorce process. Have they already interviewed attorneys? Are they ready to begin? Along the way, at many different points, people talk to attorneys, and I think that's a very good idea. But I would suggest even if you are just starting to think about divorce and whether it's right for you, a consultation at that phase is, I think, appropriate, because at that point, it's going to let you know, what does the divorce world look like? How do the legal systems work for your area in your state? And what are the divorce laws that you're going to need to know, and how may they impact you in terms of financial issues and also related to kids? And that may help you to, in the discernment process, make a decision about whether you want to divorce, and also perhaps inform when and how you decide that you may want to move through the divorce process. All of the points along that spectrum, I think, are ripe for having a consultation for an attorney. But I think sometimes earlier is better, because it can really shape the way that you approach the process if, in fact, you decide to move forward.
So you mentioned there it's a good idea to maybe speak to more than one attorney. Can you talk a little bit about that and how that plays out for somebody who is potentially going through a divorce?
I think it's critical to talk to multiple attorneys who have different perspectives, different styles, different approaches. Just like you wouldn't necessarily buy the first house that you tour when you're looking for a new home, although maybe you get lucky and you find the right one right away. It's probably not going to happen that way. You probably need to see a few properties to make a decision and really know what feels right and what meets your needs and what fits you best. And I think that you can take that same analogy and extrapolate it to a family law professional, a divorce attorney, because ultimately we do have different philosophies. We have different skill sets. Some attorneys, for example, love to litigate, and that's maybe the primary thing that they do, and they mostly focus on court. And that's not a bad thing, but you need to understand that if you're looking for someone who is perhaps more of a mediator or a collaborative law attorney, that may not be a litigation attorney. And those different practice approaches do mean something different to different people who practice in those areas. So you want to try to find the person who's going to have the approach that makes sense for you, the skill set to do the approach that makes sense for you, and also that has the right match, I guess, in terms of style. Strategy is important too. What do we think about how to approach the process? There are different philosophies about what to do and how to do it and when to do it in the divorce process. And when you talk to different people, you're probably going to get a lot of the same interpretations of what the law can do, but you might get a different interpretation of what perhaps would be the best approach given your case, which is different than anyone else. Every case is uniquely different, and tailoring those things to your specific facts and circumstances makes a lot of sense. And I think you'd want the professional who's going to be aligned with you to do that.
So we are going to talk about alignment, about fit. I love the analogy, by the way, of the home. And quite honestly, if that's the first home you've seen, maybe you need to see all the other homes to know that one is the right one for you. So the same with an attorney. If you've never dealt with an attorney before, you may not know that's the right attorney till you speak to others and go, no, I was much more comfortable with the first one I met with even. So I really do like that analogy a lot. And as you said, you know, there's a lot of factors, and we'll explore some of them as we go, but there's a lot of factors that people need to consider. And again, being prepared and starting early gives them the time, I think, sometimes to be able to do all of the things that you've been speaking about and get ready for it all.
Right.
So,
the one thing I would add to the when to talk to an attorney question is this: if the other party, the spouse on the other side perhaps of the divorce, has already started the process, that's also a time when you want to start consulting with someone. Because if a case has been filed, for example, or if you know that your spouse has retained counsel, I think you're going to need to start talking to someone, because depending on what's happening in your case, if a case has been filed, there could be legal deadlines that might impact you.
You know, and it's so important that people realize every case is unique, and you are unique as a case. I tell my clients all the time, you could be living next to somebody who's going through a divorce at the same time. They're probably, if they're in your neighborhood and living next door, probably in a similar home, driving a similar car, probably similar amount of kids, and have a completely different need and a completely different case. So it's nice to learn from other people, but always understanding that that's their case, it's not your case. I think that's also a very important piece that you pointed out as well.
Right. Sometimes people want the results of their next door neighbor or their friend and, you know, their Aunt Sally who got divorced 20 years ago. Things change and everything is unique to you. And I think it's really important. I tell my clients all the time, you need to stay in your own lane, because you can look to the right, look to the left. We all know people who have been divorced, but their cases are unique in so many ways. The spouses, the finances, the children, the judges, the county, everything is different about where they were situated. And so we can't necessarily compare apples to apples. You might be under the same state's laws, but very different outcomes can happen.
True, very true. And, you know, a lot of counties have more than one judge. Each judge, as you said, as an attorney might have a different philosophy or an approach. the judges all have their biases and their approaches also. So I think all of this is very important.
Exactly. And having, I think there's a sort of an old sort of legal joke about, a good lawyer knows the law, an excellent lawyer knows the judge, because you have to be able to understand who you're working with and who's going to make the ultimate recommendations and rulings in a case too.
Right. That's so true. And, just talking about people in the mix, having the right team in your corner is so important. I've said this many times on the show and to clients. How should someone who is considering divorce find a divorce attorney referral in their area? And, particularly sometimes, you don't always know people who've gone through a divorce or they went through a divorce 5-10 years ago. How do you find that referral? How do you know, how to kind of get in touch with the right attorneys?
There are lots of different ways. I think the first sort of order of making that kind of inquiry is, who do you know who would know divorce attorneys? Because ultimately there are lots of degrees of separation and lots of adjacencies that are going to help you to find a divorce attorney in your area, even though you may not think you know someone who directly understands the divorce world and may be plugged into being able to refer you to someone. Think about all the connections to attorneys that you might already have, whether it's through other professionals. Like, for example, a financial professional might have connections to divorce attorneys, because we sometimes cross-refer a lot of business to other people in those areas because our clients actually need financial professionals, and so there can be an adjacency there. Sometimes mental health professionals are a good source for connection to divorce attorneys for the same reason, because a lot of times I have clients who, if they're not already working with a divorce, if they're working in a divorce matter with a therapist already, that's great. But sometimes I also need them to start looking into potential referrals with therapists. And sometimes therapists refer me cases too. So there's another adjacency there in terms of thinking about other professionals who might know and be plugged into divorce attorneys. And I will tell you that there are more other options than just that. You can think about medical professionals too. Sometimes we're all in the same offices talking about what we do. And I've gotten referrals from a dentist. I've gotten referrals from doctors. It's just one of those things where it makes sense in terms of who do you know who might know these other professionals, whether it's a personal relationship or a professional one. That's a great way to start. And I will also tell you, I've gotten referrals from people from gym memberships that I had 20 years ago. And you just never know the 6 degrees of separation about how people are going to find you. So I think the first question is just to ask who you know, and get those sources of information from people who might be able to lead you in that direction. And then also I will add, if you don't have those people already, and if you're brand new to a city and you've just moved, for example, and you might need to have those connections, your local bar associations will have referral services. And whether that's at the city level, the state level, the county level, they're going to have referral networks for attorneys. And so one other way you can do that is to call the bar association and ask them, and they will probably have a referral service.
So, we spoke a little earlier kind of about having the right people on your side, that right team, and building that teams. This is one way. I have referred Jennifer business. We've worked together. Obviously, we have a comfort and a trust in each other's abilities, and we work together well because we continue to do that. That's going to help. So sometimes adding those people, to that mix is going to save you money and get you a better outcome, because you now have a team working for you as opposed to one or maybe two individuals working separately. So I think that's also a very, very important thing for somebody to consider as well when they're doing all of this. And your team should be speaking, to each other, in my opinion. It's very difficult if I'm working on somebody's finances and putting everything together, and then I give a report and the attorney takes it and says, oh, okay, I've got everything I need. Well, do you really? How did that report come together? What were the nuances? What were the discussions behind it? So I think having that team can be very powerful as well when you look at it that way as well.
I agree 100%. And I have it on my website, even if I'm pretty sure it's still there. It takes a village to get divorced. It really does. And a lot of different people have to be on that team. I need financial people like yourself. I need a real estate professional more than not, because we're either buying or selling houses. I need people who are experts in educational issues for kids. I need all kinds of different professionals in my clients' lives. And so it's really important to have those networks. And those networks can also be the basis for that team, because of course, all of these people have different touch points to your matter, whether it's child-related issues or financial issues. But having those people who are able to talk to each other is critical, because, for example, to use the financial analogy that we were talking about, I need those people in my clients' lives before we get to the final finish line, because I need to understand how settlement negotiations might be impacted if we make one set of choices or another. So having that team approach is critical because it really does impact outcomes.
No, I agree 100%. You know, one of the things that I recommend is when that dissolution agreement or that marriage settlement agreement, there's different names depending what state you're in. When that's put together, I always recommend have a financial person review it, because, for example, I often see in this dissolution agreement, somebody will say the spouse keeping the home has 60 days to refinance. Well, if that's the spouse who is receiving maintenance, they probably not going to qualify in 60 days, because almost every mortgage bank wants you to have 6 months of consecutive maintenance, things like that. Or is there something that's in that MSA that might trigger a tax event that can be avoided? So putting the legal document together is vital, and it's something you got to live by. You want to almost put a checklist together, and I do that as well, of what has to be happen after the document is signed, because that's not the end of it all. But that's where your team works together and gets you such great outcomes. You know, just one other resource, they've been on my show. I'm a big fan, and I know Jennifer is as well, because we actually met at one of their events originally, is the Lilac Tree. So for those in Chicago, the Chicagoland area, they are an amazing resource for people going through divorce. I obviously don't know every city what resources they have, but I do know that there are other resources like that in other cities. But these are resources that are often nonprofits that help people through and sometimes beyond the divorce as well. So obviously from a resource perspective, I think those are all things that you can consider. I would recommend maybe listening again, because Jennifer ran through a lot of different resources and different things for people to consider with that as well. Plus, it's always nice when people listen again to my show. I can't complain about that either. So talking about, okay, we now decide we've got this referral. Great. Now, what are some of the kind of most important questions maybe that somebody should be asking during the consultation with a divorce attorney?
Well, I think that one of the most important questions really does have to do with process. I start every consultation with explaining to my clients what their process options really are in terms of where you're going to start your matter. Are you going to start in litigation? Is there a reason for you to already need to file that case in court right away? And sometimes that's a necessity, because we might have active issues about perhaps threats or actual behavioral decisions that impact financial issues, that impact children, that warrant filing a case right away because I need the court's relief. And the only way to get the court's relief is to file a case where I have the ability to go to the judge and ask the judge to make rulings right away sometimes in my client's matters. So despite the fact that you might decide that you would rather approach your matter from a more mediation or collaborative perspective, there may not be that option depending on what's going on in terms of the facts and circumstances of your case. So you might need litigation sooner rather than later. That's one approach. Now, sometimes you can also approach a case from the mediation perspective, which could happen when a case has already been filed, or after a case has been filed, or before the case has been filed, and you can work behind the scenes with an attorney to try to get the ball rolling without having those court appearances required of you, if everyone is willing and able to work well together. And then you can also decide if you wanted to entertain the collaborative route, which is really no court until the very end, by virtue of a process agreement that everybody signs that says we're going to work through this matter collaboratively, and we're going to cross the finish line with perhaps that one court appearance that's required to get the divorce judgment finalized. So the process path, I think, is one of the most important questions you can ask. And is your attorney well versed in all of those areas, or maybe not? That might matter in terms of selection, because you might want to talk to an attorney who does mediation instead of a more litigation-based attorney. Or if an attorney wants to do a collaborative process with you, are they able to do that by virtue of their credentials and training? So that's the first piece of it, I think, in terms of how you're going to get divorced. And the way in which you do that shapes the whole process. First piece. Second piece, I think, is important when you have minor children, or college-age children for that matter, who are still at issue in the divorce. I always want to talk about children in terms of the primacy of the process, because depending on what's going on in your case, you're going to always have questions about perhaps the parenting schedule. You're going to have questions about decision-making for your children. And asking your attorney about what their approaches are to that as it pertains to your family and the specific needs that you have are really important questions. And I always want to start with kids because in my estimation, they are the most important part of the divorce process. So then you're going to have those decision-making questions and parenting time questions. And also, of course, we have financial issues. Those are the big sort of three: process, kids, and money, I think, in terms of how you want to talk about the divorce process, because the financial issues, asset and liability division, you're going to be talking about what to do with all of those different pieces. And you're going to be talking about the college contribution issue if you have college-age children. You're going to be talking about maintenance, which is spousal support, child support if you have minor children. You're going to be talking about the impact of that property settlement on your finances, as we just discussed, and having that financial review is important to that end. So all of these things matter, right down to the tax implications of what you're doing in terms of the financials. And having a conversation that is candid and honest, I think is really paramount with your attorney in the consultation, because you're going to need to tell them all of the things about your finances and your children, really, that are going to have them able to have the knowledge base to really help you. And I think being completely transparent in that phase is so important, because we're here to help, but we can't help unless we know everything. And sometimes even when there are financial adversities, it's not the most fun subject to have to talk about, but at the same time, we can't help you through that if we don't know.
I think everything is spot on. You know, a lot of people come in with an impression of what's going to happen, and it's not always accurate. People will come in to me, for example, say, oh, it's going to be 50-50, right? And I'll say to them, well, are you going to live on the left side of the home or the right side of the home if you're splitting it all 50-50? And then it kind of creates that picture like, oh, it's not, you know, there's a little different, and understanding that and having somebody to guide you, I think, is huge. Jennifer, I'm going to ask, we got to take a break. We got to pay some bills, but if you can share, how can people get in touch with you? We're going to take a break right after that.
Sure. My website is www.lavinfamilylaw.com. And that's probably the best way. Phone number and all the address that you'll need is right there.
Great. And we will be right back. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello and welcome back to the Financial Wellness Hour. My guest today is Jennifer Lavin, and we are talking about divorce. Are you prepared? And we are on WGSN-DB, the Going Solo Network. One of the things I always like to do, because there is so much information that gets spoken about and shared, and always just recap some of the things, and I can never always get them back or everything down, but I try. So some of the things we've covered are: when do you meet with an attorney? How do you find an attorney? Having and building the right team. important questions that you should be asking. Is my attorney aligned with me? We've spoken about some considerations. We've spoken about your 3 big pillars, which I think are huge: the process, your kids, and the finances. Educating yourself, understanding that process is huge, because there are different ways that it can go, and they do have very different approaches and different ways that things are settled. And whether you retain control, lose control, these are some of the things that need to be understood as well. We've been speaking a little bit about kind of picking an attorney. I would throw out, it really applies not just to an attorney when you're interviewing them. You should really be interviewing any professional that you're working with. Obviously, a good start is those referrals, because they've probably been vetted in many ways. But you still, I say to people all the time, you know what, I'm really good at what I do. I still may not be the right person for you, and that's okay. You need the right person for you going through something like this. And if somebody wants, on my website, lifecycle.financial, I did write a blog on how to pick a divorce attorney. And again, the concept and ideas are going to apply not just to a divorce attorney, but to any of the professionals that you're working with. So as you can see already, just in the first half, we have covered a tremendous amount. I'm not sure we're going to get through all my questions in the second half, but we will try. And if not, we'll just have you back, hopefully. So
thank you. Happy to do it.
You know, so we've spoken about, you know, how do you find the attorney, the referral, the, you know, all these things. So how do you evaluate or know if your attorney is aligned with your needs? We've spoken about this alignment thing. How do you know?
Well, I think it's important from the outset to be candid with your potential divorce attorney, or if you've hired someone, your actual divorce attorney, about your approach and ultimately what your needs and interests are, because those needs and interests help to then shape what become the requests that come out of the process in terms of what you want that parenting schedule to look like. What do you want the decision making to be for your children? How do you want the financial settlement to go? And I think this is fundamental, because if you and your attorney are not on the same page and don't have the same style, the same approach, the same strategy, then there's probably going to be that dissonance in your relationship. And that could lead to a fractured relationship such that you may wind up changing attorneys later. So I think it's important to be really candid up front and talk about style, talk about your own facts and circumstances, what your priorities are, because your attorney's not going to necessarily be able to just intuit that. You really need to have that conversation. And I think once you do retain an attorney, having those touch points along the way in terms of regular meetings, if you want to do it that way, or regular calls, Zoom meetings now, are really good ideas, because the attorney-client relationship tends to be episodic. It tends to float in terms of certain time periods where there might be deadlines. There may be a lull between deadlines and maybe not much is happening. But when things start to percolate, if you have a court appearance, for example, or if you have a mediation session, or if you have a collaborative team meeting coming up, you're going to want to have those meetings with your attorney to really come back to center and ultimately decide what your next steps are going to be and how you want to approach the next steps in your matter.
And yeah, I'm sure you've heard this also from clients. They say, I just want this to be over. But helping them sometimes, or understanding what they are looking for beyond the divorce. And they may not even know at this point, because they haven't thought that far ahead, I think also becomes a very important piece of this. You know, people often say, and rightfully so, you need this good fit with your attorney. Fit can come in different ways, right? Obviously, the approach that you're taking in the divorce that we're speaking about, the personality, the type of case, there might be this hurry up and wait because you've now got this deadline. We need everything in the next 2 days. And then all of a sudden, nothing happens maybe for 3 weeks, a month, or, you know, depending, sometimes even more. Can you talk a little bit about the fit of your divorce attorney? But I'm going to ask you to give a little bit of a different slant as well. How do you gauge the fit from the client's perspective? But I think it needs to be two-directional, right? I'm sure attorneys need to have a fit as well. Those clients need to fit in. Can you talk a little bit just in general about the fit as a whole?
I think that's a terrific approach, because you're absolutely right insofar as it is bidirectional. Because when I'm interviewing a potential client, of course, they're interviewing me, right? Because of course they're thinking about whether they want to hire me, but I'm also thinking about, do I want to accept their matter? And I have that agency too. So it's a two-way street insofar as the client makes decisions, but also the attorney makes decisions. And that fit question it's really an individual calculus in so many ways. And it's almost a feeling, I think, sometimes that you can articulate and you can describe what goes into fit. It's certainly skill set. It's certainly personality. It's demeanor. It's approach. It's the amount of contact that you would expect and require from an attorney and that they would be willing to provide you. What are their communications protocols? What are their policies on a lot of different things about client contact, about expectations, about client production insofar as what you have to do as a litigant in your matter. There are lots of these different things that go into the fit question because everyone has their own style, their own philosophy, their own policies, and that is going to inform how they practice. And ultimately, when I'm interviewing a potential client, I'm looking for those kinds of signals that they are going to be ready and willing and able to ultimately to fit into my firm's policies too, and my approach, as much as I'm looking to be a good fit for them. So it really is a two-way sort of equation. And I have told people that I may not be the best fit for them because my philosophy, my approach may not exactly align with what they're looking for. And I'm sure that that's been on the other end of the spectrum in terms of not every client retains me either, because maybe they have found someone who has a bit of a different touch, a bit of a different practice philosophy, a different practice wisdom about how they're going to approach that particular client's matter. And that's really okay. I think it's really important to understand that your divorce attorney is one of the most important professional relationships you're going to have in your life, as far as I'm concerned. I think it really is. And taking the time and making that diligent inquiry is going to benefit you in the end, because like you said in the very early stages of our time together today, you're going to talk to more than one person, and you're going to maybe circle back to this first, second, or third person you talk to after you've had comparisons and understand, oh, maybe this feels a little different than that one.
Right. And I think the communication piece is so huge, and I think expressing your expectations. I've got a client, or I've had a couple clients that they didn't tell me up front, but if they, emailed me at 10:30 at night, they expected a response by the time they woke up in the morning. Well, you know what? That's probably not going to happen. If there's a court case happening the next day, that might be a little bit of a different situation. But understanding the way you're going to work together, understanding that fit, and it's a two-way thing, because if I have an expectation of my divorce attorney, and then that's just not their process, which is okay. Everyone has their process. I need to know that up front, but at the same time, they need to understand, the client needs to understand it as well. So I think really, again, and this comes to what we were speaking about all the way through, preparing and coming in early and starting as early as you can. All of these things can be worked through as opposed to rushing through and going, oh my God, I need an attorney. Okay, the first one I speak to is that. It's not going to have the same outcome. If it is, it's just total luck. So obviously preparing is going to help you not just in that working relationship, but really understanding the process, really understanding what your responsibilities are, because that's a big one as well. People don't always understand that they do have those responsibilities. And I think all of this plays into getting a better outcome, as we said right from the beginning. So.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and divorce is a legal process. The people need to go through to dissolve a marriage. They're not familiar with it often, or very often they've never done it before. And they have more needs than just kind of a legal document at the end, if I can put that not glibly, but kind of simplifying the process significantly. So what are some of the other considerations someone going through a divorce should be thinking about and considering and putting time into preparing?
That's an excellent question, Hirsch, because ultimately there is life after divorce, and ultimately my job is to work myself out of a job. That's how I see this. I want to be bracketed in my clients' lives for a certain duration of time. You don't want your divorce attorney in your life forever. It's not like your family medicine doctor who you're going to go see every year for prescriptions and checkups no matter what. I think you have a defined relationship for a certain period of time. And when you're thinking about what's going to happen as a byproduct of what happens in your divorce, it's important to be looking forward, because this document that you're drafting, whether it's your parenting plan or your marital settlement agreement, sets the stage for so many things that are going to happen in the next decades of your life. And so you want to think about financials. You want to think about long-term parenting goals. What are your goals in terms of what you want to come out of the divorce process with, in terms of as it pertains to your kids, as it pertains to your finances? What do you need and what do you want? Those are not necessarily the same things, but having a focal point on both of those and trying to maximize your outcomes financially and as it relates to your kids is going to be the most forward-thinking path to think about not just the temporary time frame that your divorce attorney is in your life, but also for the next year, 5, 10, 20 years from now, and how the things that you do or don't do today as you're getting divorced will shape that reality. And that has to do with, again, being able to financially plan for a future. If you are receiving maintenance, what are you going to need to be able to get you through retirement? If you are receiving a property settlement, is it going to be sustainable for your style of living, standard of living, to get you through the next phases of your life? When you're thinking about your kids and you're thinking about parenting time, think about it big picture. It's the whole year, right? We're thinking about this, but it's going to evolve with your kids because they might be 5 when you started, but they're going to be 15 and 18 eventually. And how does this parenting plan evolve with your family? So I think it's really important to think about the divorce as starting at this point in time, but it really manifests in ways that are going to affect you in a positive way, I hope, for decades.
And I always tell people that this is really the first chapter in the rest of your life. It's not the last chapter in this part of your life. How you set yourself up moving forward is huge. And, you know, I work from a prioritize, organize, simplify method, right? I want to know your values and your priorities, and then we want to try to get as much of that into your life as possible moving forward. Because you got to remember there are going to be changes. You probably got similar income, 2 households. You can't be living exactly how you were before. Keeping all of that in mind, often people have never thought through those priorities. And I actually have an exercise often I do before they are even looking at the financials and creating a budget and, you know, the net worth statement and all the rest. We run through their priorities. And it's not just the financial priorities, but sometimes the other priorities have a financial impact. But with your kids, with, you know, how much time you need for yourself. But then the other piece to it is, once you know your priorities, it's also important to understand what are your spouse's priorities, because when you're negotiating, the more that you can think about and try to predict these things, the better you can negotiate. And then when you work with that attorney who guides you through the process, they know what your priorities are. They know where the, so to speak, contention in the negotiation or those like hard battles are going to be, because you both want the same thing. It comes together so much easier and quicker. But again, it all comes back to the preparation of what we're looking at when we're doing this. So very, very important, all of this, I think.
Absolutely. And I think it's important to understand you cannot settle with yourself. So you have to understand what the other spouse is going to be looking for. And you know that person better than anyone, because ultimately you've had the time in your life with this person, and you're ultimately going to be the best judge, short of our judge, maybe if we're in a litigated matter, who's going to be able to understand what your spouse's needs and interests are too. They may match, they may be competitive with yours, but at the same time, hopefully that can also help well round why we're doing what we're doing in a settlement conversation, because you want to understand it's not just about you, right? Because we have 2 people in this equation, both of whom you're not going to get everything that you want ever in any family law case. Nobody does, I promise you. That's the one thing I know for sure about divorce. Nobody gets everything that they want. But if you can maximize what's important to you and hopefully minimize what isn't, then that's the best possible result.
So, you know, and I think sometimes there's this misconception that an attorney is the panacea of all ills, right? I'm going through this horrible situation, you're going to fix it, right? It doesn't quite work that way. I wish sometimes it did for my clients' sake. And you and I have had multiple conversations and worked on clients getting them ready for that next stage. Can you share a little bit about what you think is, or why you think it's so important that somebody does understand their needs and their values ahead of time? And I'm talking both emotionally and financially, understanding who they are.
Sure. It's really critical because I can't necessarily interpret that for you. I'm not going to be able to be the person who is the mind reader, for example, to understand, oh, okay, when we're talking about parenting time, you really want these holidays because this has been your family tradition and this is what's important to you. Or maybe it's not on the actual day, so we don't necessarily care about Christmas Eve as much as we care about something else. There are lots of those examples where sometimes the priorities aren't necessarily obvious on their face because they range depending on who my client is. They might have different things that they care about. Some things that you might expect they care about, they really don't. And so that's so helpful in terms of what we understand and what we're asking for, because maybe we can make quicker work of a compromise if I know that, okay, we really don't need to go to war over the holiday schedule because you might have an agreement already and you don't even realize it. But at the same time, that can also translate into saving money, because the better that you know yourself and you can articulate what it is that's important to you about the settlement as it pertains to money and children, the better that your attorney can then communicate that with you and for you to the other spouse and the other spouse's attorney as well, in terms of having those overarching conversations. Because if we're really just in parallel and we don't understand what the other side is asking for and why, then it's a lot harder to effectuate a settlement agreement. But when we're having those conversations and they're informed by the needs and interests of both parties, I think that's where we can really mine for the positive outcomes, because we can meet your needs hopefully as much as we can by having those really detailed conversations. Because what gets articulated with needs and interests is the why you want what you want. The position part is the what you want, right? I want X, I want this amount of dollars, I want this amount of holiday time. But the why is really what we're unpacking here. And that's the part of every divorce that makes the most sense, because we're doing all of these things for you. And ultimately, if you know what you want and why you want it, it's going to be a lot easier to effectuate that settlement conversation with the other side, because ultimately, hopefully, we're coming to a place where we're more in communication and not less, we're not in parallel with each other. We're actually having those intersections with the other side to meet both of your needs.
And it's so interesting you say that. This is going back about probably a little over 2 years ago already. I had a client say to me, we are right there, we're done. He just said to me, how much do you want in maintenance? And I looked at him and I said, I don't know. So knowing who you are, and the truth is, it actually sparked in me, I created a program called Who Am I Financially, very specifically for the vast majority of people coming through a divorce. You tend to split the labor and somebody takes finances and the other person tends not to know the finances, right? They don't know their net worth. They don't know their budget. They don't know how to pay the bills in the most efficient way. They don't know how to eliminate their debt. All these things are so crucial. And the way I do budgets, I do it I actually call it a divorce budget, because I start with your essentials and then we know your threshold of what you have to live on and what you need at a minimum. Then we build in all the kind of discretionary spend of all those things that you want in your life, and somewhere in between is where you're probably going to end up, but we know where to start and we know where we can't go below. These are all vital, and the same with your kids, the same emotionally, the same with all of these things that you're talking about. And unfortunately, I have about half a dozen more questions for you, but we got to start wrapping this up. So I'm going to ask if you can share again how people can get in touch with you. And we'll take the questions for the next show when you come back, but we got to start wrapping up. So if you can start with that, or end with that, I guess that would be great.
Sure. Again, Jennifer Lavin. The website is www.lavinfamilylaw.com.
Jennifer, thank you. This has been great. I've always seen you as such an amazing resource, and I just think the things that we've spoken about are vital. You don't always think of them, all of them anyway, initially, just, off the bat, and being able to simplify some of these issues, just not an easy thing under any circumstances. So thank you for being here. Thank you very much. I really appreciate it. I am Hirsch Serman, the host for the Financial Wellness Hour. Please reach out to me through my website, lifecycle.financial. That's lifecycle.financial. You can ask questions for me, or if you want for Jennifer Lavin, I can relay them as well. Or you can go to lavinfamilylaw.com. Our guest today was Jennifer Lavin, who brought an amazing insight into many different areas to get ready for divorce, get better outcomes. Thank you so much, and we will see you in 2 weeks on my next show. Thank you.